All right, so just find these notes, and we're going to talk about jellyfish. So these are the invertebrates of the sea notes. These are the ones that we took guided notes on about coral reefs and all that good stuff. You're going to need to have those out so we can add some more to it. If you want to look at yep, that's them. If you want to look at the lecture, you're going to start on slide 39, if that's where you want to look at. But it's called Invertebrates of the Sea, Nigeria. So find those notes, and then we're going to add to those. Invertebrates of the Sea lecture, Nigeria, or Nigeria guided notes. You should have. Everybody should have done these. Still should have done them. So go to the lecture on the modules if you need to, and you're going to slide down to slide 39. So you can at least follow along. So if you're on the modules on marine, it's under Invertebrates of the Sea, Invertebrates Nigerians, guided notes. It's the second thing in that module. Yeah, invertebrate, because I have to shorten it on Canvas. It only gives me so many letters, which kind of sucks. But Invertebrates Nigerians, guided notes, it's those guided notes. It's like number 2 on the module. And it's slide number 39 is where we're starting. So if you can't find your notes, just grab a sheet of paper so you can add notes to your own. Yeah, we're talking about right there. Those are the right ones. All right, so we're going to start on slide 39. If you can't find your notes, just write them on a sheet of paper because we're going to talk about the next section that you're going to need to know. And the next section that we're going to need of Nigeria is the second class. So that's fine. You can write it on the back. All right, so we talked about the first class of Nigerians, the Anthrozoa. Now we're going to talk about the Skyfazoa. All right, so the Skyfazoa are obviously what you would call a jellyfish. A jellyfish is not a fish. They're more technically jellies, I guess you would say. But they're from the class Skyfazoa. So we've already learned about Arthrozoa, which were the corals, which we've showed you. Now we're going to talk about Skyfazoa. So in Skyfazoa, you're going to be looking for what are jellyfish, what are their characteristics. You're going to have to be able to classify animals based off of their class. So make sure that you know that the Skyfazoa are the jellyfish. And to me, they look like they're like floating or flying in the water. That's how I remember sky for like sky in the air floating. Kind of helps. I don't know. All right, so jellyfish are Nigerians. They're in the phylum Nigeria class Skyfazoa. And so Nigerians are really diverse. You should know that. So not only were they corals, but they're also jellyfish. They're also sea anemones, and a couple of other little things. So remember that the one trait that all of them have in common is stinging cells, right? So the one large trait in Nigeria that you should know is they all have stinging cells. And the one thing that you're probably familiar with stinging, probably not on corals as much, but definitely jellyfish, right? Everybody knows don't touch the jellyfish tentacles. Because they do, they sting, they quite hurt. So you have quite a few things in Nigeria. Remember, we have corals, we have jellyfish, and we have sea anemones. All right, so Skyfazoa are free swimming. Only in the adult stages are they free swimming. Sorry, it's kind of hard to say. All right, when they're young and they're like larvae, we're going to learn that they do have a stage where they're attached to the sea bottom. And it's called their polyp stage. This is technically their medusa stage, which is the second stage. These are adult jellyfish. All right, so they're free swimming with jelly-like bells. So they all have these bells. And they're typically like transparent or translucent, meaning you can like sort of kind of see through them. They're not opaque. And they all have stinging tentacles around the edge of the bell in some way. All right, so they have some major characteristics. The first thing you're going to need to know is they are not fish. They have no spines, so no vertebrae, no bones. These are invertebrates. They have radial symmetry. Remember, radial symmetry was the one where they could be symmetrical in more than one way, right? You can cut them in left and right halves. You can cut them in top and bottom halves. You can cut them in all different kinds of halves, and the halves would still be identical, roughly. All right, so they're radially symmetrical. They do have a mouth. It's underneath. It's kind of rudimentary. It's not like a mouth like you would think, but there is a mouth there. There's a gastrovascular opening that they consider a mouth, and it's on the bottom of the bell, like in between the tentacles. And these are just some pretty moon jellies. All right, so some other characteristics. They have a simple nervous system. These actually have a nervous system. They have a nerve network of receptor cells. When one part of the cell of any of this animal, any part of it is stimulated, then the entire organism reacts. So it's not like you, where you have specific pathways. So like you have reflexes, the doctor hits you in the knee and your knee goes, and kicks out. If you did a type of reflex on them, it would literally be their entire body. They don't have like sections of capabilities. It's just all or nothing. They're pretty simple. But they do have nervous networks, which is unique. And they do respond to stimuli. They just respond, all of them respond, And look how huge this jellyfish is. This is the great jellyfish. They're enormous. They can be tiniest of tiny to microscopic to huge, like 6 meters long. And a meter is 3.3 feet. Like very big jellies. Kind of. They don't really have eyes. They just kind of live around, just kind of hanging out. Basically, they're opportunistic. So that means that they're not going to go out and be like predators because they don't have eyes to like hunt. But what's going to happen is basically if anything gets caught or entangled in those tentacles, they will eat it. Whatever it is. Yeah, if you got caught up enough. Those stinging cells are venomous. They will usually paralyze whatever organism it is. Now, if it's a small jelly, it depends on which jellyfish we're talking about. Like in your closed reading, you talked about the box jellies. The box jellyfish, pound for pound, has the most venomous venom out of any animal that we have found on this planet Earth. Tiny speck of it could kill you, or put you in agonizing pain for weeks. It is horrific. And the little tiny box jelly is about this long, including tentacles. Completely clear. So you've got to you can't say like just the little ones won't hurt you and the big ones will. Not necessarily. It depends on the species, but they really can pack a punch depending on what they are. Some don't, some do. Yeah.
Aren't the baby ones more like dangerous because they can control their venom or whatever?
No. In fact, all of them give, it depends on the amount of firing. So each of these little cells in their tentacles fire a barb full of the venom. So it's not like a snake where that would be the case, right? It's if you touch a tentacle, they're going to fire. However many you touch, however long of a tentacle you touch, that kind of determines it, right? So a small tentacle touch versus a wrapping around you touch is a huge difference. It's more like surface area than anything else.
But in the eggplant, they would say that they would put like the wetsuit on, but couldn't it still go through the wetsuit?
Not necessarily. It depends on which one it is. We're going to talk about the stinging cells. There's a lot. We actually get to watch a guy get stung today. All right, so jellyfish have 2 forms, polyp and medusa. Young, actually, they're little larvae, and they release sperm and egg into the water. Sperm meets egg, voila, here's your zygotes. They fall to the bottom of the ocean. They actually attach to the bottom as a polyp. So when they're attached to the bottom, they're considered a polyp, and they look more like a sea anemone, kind of. And then as they mature, they get longer and longer and longer, and those segments will break off and they'll become the Medusa form, which is the free swimming adult. So they kind of have two forms. They, as the baby, they're stuck to the bottom, and then they just kind of break off in segments and form this Medusa, which is kind of unique. But they start life as that little larvae. They're floating tiny babies, and they attach to a surface, so they become sessile. So sessile, S-E-S-S-I-L, means they can't move or immobile. They're just sitting in one spot. And then they mature into a polyp, which then they break off segments as these Medusa forms. So if they're growing from the bottom like this, they break off and flip over, and there's your Medusa. And they just break off another one and flip over, and it comes around as these Medusa, these umbrella-shaped little, jellyfish, what you would consider a jellyfish, right? They have epidermis, gastrodermis, and mesoglias. All right, so the mesoglia is the layer that's kind of unique to these jellyfish. So the mesoglia, I got it. There we go. So the mesoglia is kind of like a very lightweight, airy layer, and it's meant to allow the cap to float in the water. So it's kind of thicker and more of like a lightweight layer. So in this photo, it's kind of the gray here, and that's that meso. Meso means middle, and it's just like allowing for lower density, so these things can kind of like float along in the water column. So they're not like hanging down. So here's the life cycle of a jellyfish, which is kind of unique. So the eggs and sperm are released into the water. When they're released, sperm meets egg, voila, you get a little zygote. That zygote turns into a larvae. The larvae settle to the bottom of the ocean floor. Say what? Yep, and then they form these polyps. Okay, so these polyps grow from the bottom. They're stuck on the bottom. And that's to help them survive. If they're free floating, think about everything in the ocean that could eat you. If you're free floating and tiny, pretty much anything could eat you. If you're stuck to the bottom, though, you have less predator predation. So it's kind of like a natural selection is selected for them to be at the bottom. So they have, your backside is protected, basically. So you have a lot less chance of being eaten if you're stuck to a surface, especially in the ocean. They kind of look like plants, but they're not. They're animals. And so then these polyps mature and they break off and flip upside, back the right way, basically. And they turn into this mature Medusa, which is kind of unique. Yeah, they still have stinging cells, no matter if they're stuck as a polyp or they're free floating as a Medusa.
So which ones? The back little tentacles are the ones you ain't supposed to touch?
Any tentacles. You can touch the tops, the cap, but that's it. But you better be careful because, if a tentacle moves in the water, you're stuck.
So you don't actually get electrocuted.
It's not electrocution. It's more of the venom.
Is it more like a fire?
It burns. It burns very badly. It's like a sting, but it never stops,
That's the whole cartoon.
Yeah, let's not get our information from SpongeBob. All right, but the locomotion. So these guys they are able to move somewhat. They don't have legs, right? They don't have fins. They don't have tails. They're very, very primitive in their design. But they can almost like pulse like that and kind of get some movement off of it. They're not going to like run away from anything by any means, but they're going to like pulse and kind of float a little bit. They don't really have a whole lot of locomotion going on because they're pretty simple. So the idea of these invertebrates is they are more simple of a design than the vertebrates, which are a lot more complex and have a lot more specialization. But they primarily use the tides and the winds to move. Jellyfish tend to come into a beach and they tend to hang around because you have to wait on the tide to clear them or the current to clear them. That's why a lot of our beaches, especially if you go to our northern beaches in Jacksonville and above, they tend to have a lot of problems with jellyfish because the jellyfish will come in seasonally. Like right now, if you go to Jacksonville Beach North, you're going to find a lot of jellyfish. In the wintertime, our beaches are covered in jellyfish. Now, if you go south, they're not so much because the currents are stronger, so they get taken and cleared out earlier.
Is there the top of them poisonous too, or just
No, just the tentacles. All right, so respiration. So what is respiration? So respiration is how they obtain oxygen. They have no lungs, like us, right? They have no lungs, but every cell requires oxygen still. So how do they get it? It is just diffusing through their membranes. Oxygen is in the water, and it just naturally diffuses through their body membranes, and that's about it. The carbon dioxide, the waste gas, like us with our lungs, we breathe in the oxygen, we release the CO2, right? It's a nice, easy thing that you can imagine. Well, they still have to release CO2, but they don't have the lungs like we do to, make it nice and beautiful where it comes in and out. So there's just over their entire surface, they're just exchanging those gases. That's it. So can they die from a buildup? Yeah. They have to release the gas into the water. It's a slow rate of diffusion. That's why they tend to be smaller, right? The bigger you are, the faster you have to have that diffusion rate, the faster you have to have more oxygen, you have to have a more CO2 release, and they can't if it's just through their skin. It's a very slow rate of exchange, which kind of limits them. Mm-hmm.
They have lungs.
Well, lungs are more efficient. They're just not as efficient at all. All right, so let's talk about how they feed. These stinging cells that everybody wants to know about. All right, so the stinging cells are these. They're called nematocysts or cnidoblasts. CN, the CNI for cnidaria, get it? But you don't say the C, but it's CN for cnidoblasts. All right, these cnidoblasts contain the poison. All right, they contain that coiled thread. So each one of these is almost like a harpoon. You know what I'm saying when I say a harpoon? It's kind of like the whalers used to use, where it's like, think of a giant bow and arrow that's attached to the boat by a rope. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? Each of these is like microscopic versions of that exact same thing. If you touch it, it stabs you. But it is still attached by, it's not a rope in this case, but it's still attached with a coiled thread. And that coiled thread literally pumps the toxin through the barb. You can't get these barbs back out of your skin very easily. And this is what actually works wonders to make them stick to you. And they will stick to you. And you have to like peel it off. And it's really, really painful depending on which species you get in contact with. But if you're a fish, this will kill you because it's paralyzing. So you'll be paralyzed completely and then eaten whole and alive.
It's like fish and turtles can use jellyfish.
Mm-mm. Because it's going to sting you. So even if you get it in their mouth, like even if a young dumb one goes and tries to bite it, it's going to get stung and it'll paralyze and die.
So how does it know if it's like a box jellyfish?
It doesn't. Let's hope that one won't live very long. It's called natural selection. If you're that dumb, you're just going to die. You're not going to make it very long. Yes.
So say it gets stuff in your arm, and you kill it and it's still be hurting and stuff.
So the point is, if you get stung, I think your question is how do you stop it from stinging you?
You pee on it.
Yeah,
okay, so everybody always thinks you pee on it. So pee is an acid. The point of it is you're wanting those barbs to get detached because the more barbs you get, the more painful it is. So no matter what, it's going to sting. the vinegar or the urine. Okay, so we don't pee on it. The reason why that used to say that is one, because it scares kids and they don't want them to touch it. And two, because in the event that you have absolutely nothing else, you might try it. But it's not going to stop it. Like, there's not enough acidity in your urine to stop the barbs from firing. So basically, you're just going to be stung and now peed on.
Will it stop a little bit?
No.
Oh.
All right, so what you want to use is vinegar. You want to use vinegar. So we always keep vinegar on the boat because in case of that, it's part of your first aid kit is you keep vinegar. And so the vinegar you pour on there, vinegar is a stronger acid and way stronger than your urine, hopefully, right? And what's going to happen is it'll stop those barbs from hopefully producing or excreting as much of the toxin. But no matter what, it's going to sting.
Wait, so there's like a bajillion of these little things?
Yeah, there's a bajillion of those in each tentacle. And however many you touch, that's the problem.
So them little round dots. Yeah, I'm just
No, that's an octopus. You're thinking differently. No, you're not. You're fine. It's just been a while since you've seen a jelly. Yeah, they hurt.
So when
Wait,
they
so they just.
so when they on the shore, like they're still alive.
Oh, yeah.
So it just drags across the.
Yes.
And then like they just all stick.
Yes. Instantaneous. So these are so fast. They're one of the fastest biological responses that we have ever found. It takes less than a millisecond for them to fire. And not just one of them fires, every one of them that you touched fires. And it's thousands and thousands. Every cell on that entire tentacle can do this, basically. So you've got thousands of them. So the point of the vinegar is just to stop them from firing. It's not to stop any of the pain, because it will still hurt.
Wait,
So this toxin paralyzes fish.
when it goes in you, which one
If
you
there's something
So the barb itself, so these little hair triggers, and then this is just sitting in here coiled, and it's just going to shoot out this barb. And it's barbed like a fishing hook is barbed. So on the end, you can't pull it out. So it's got the end, like if here's your skin, and it fires, it looks like that. So you can't pull it out.
Ooh, I bet I would.
But they're microscopic too. It's not like you could see something.
Oh, so it's not like a
There's nothing they can do for that. It just has to wear off. But once those barbs have fired their toxin, you're still going to feel the sting. So there isn't a whole lot you can do. Just don't touch them.
So the doctor can't get it out. Like you said, like let it go.
Yeah, but they're minuscule. They'll fall out eventually.
They made a what?
What if it never falls out? No, what if it
It will. It will. All right. So watch this video on how the jellyfish sting. Uh-huh. I will wait.
You're swimming in the ocean and something brushes your leg. When the tingling sets in, you realize you've been stung by a jellyfish. How do these beautiful gelatinous creatures pack such a painful punch? Jellyfish are soft because they are 95% water and are mostly made of a translucent gel-like substance called mesoglea. With such delicate bodies, they rely on thousands of venom-containing stinging cells called cnidocytes for protection and prey capture. Even baby jellyfish, the size of a pencil eraser, have the ability to sting. Larval jellyfish, ephyrae, look like tiny flowers pulsating in the sea. As they grow, they become umbrella-shaped with a bell at the top and descending tentacles around the margin. The largest species of jellyfish, the lion's mane, has tentacles that can extend more than 100 feet, longer than a blue whale. These tentacles contain most of the stinging cells, although some species have them on their bells too. Venom is ejected via a nematocyst, a whip-like hollow tubule, which lies coiled under high osmotic pressure. When mechanical or chemical stimuli
It's like a
activate an
hair. You
external
touch
trigger,
that trigger.
the lid of the cell pops open and seawater rushes in. This forces a microscopic barbed harpoon to shoot out, penetrate and inject venom into its victim. Nematocyst discharge can occur in less than a millionth of a second, making it one of nature's fastest biomechanical processes. Nematocysts can continue to fire even after a jellyfish has died, so it's important to remove lingering tentacles stuck to the skin. Rinsing with vinegar will usually render undischarged nematocysts inactive. Seawater can also help remove residual nematocysts, but don't use fresh water, because any change in salt balance alters the osmotic pressure outside of the cnidocyte and will trigger the nematocyst to fire. That's why urinating on the affected area, a common folk remedy, may do more harm than good, depending on the composition of the urine. Most jellyfish stings are a painful nuisance, but some can be deadly. An Indo-Pacific box jelly, also called a sea wasp, releases venom which can cause contraction of the heart muscles and rapid death in large doses. There's an antivenom, but the venom is fast-acting, so you need immediate medical intervention. Despite the impressive power in their tentacles, jellies aren't invincible. Their stinging cells are no match for the armor of thick-skinned predators like the leatherback turtle and ocean sunfish. These predators both have adaptations that prevent slippery jellyfish from escaping after they are engulfed. Backwards pointing spines in the turtle's mouth and esophagus, and recurved teeth behind the sunfish's cheeks. Even tiny slipper lobster larvae can cling to the bell of a jellyfish and hitch a ride, snacking on the jelly while they preserve their own energy for growth. Small agile fish use the jellies as moving reefs for protection, darting between tentacles without ever touching them. Nudibranchs, which are sea slugs covered in protective slime, can actually steal the jelly's defenses by eating the cnidocytes and transferring them to specialized sacs for later use as weapons against their own predators. Even humans might benefit from the sting of a jellyfish one day. Scientists are working on manipulating cnidocytes to deliver medicine with nematocysts rarely 3% of the size of a typical syringe needle. So, the next time you're out in the ocean, be careful, but also take a second to marvel at its wonders.
It's interesting, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, just said it there. Uh-huh. I did, didn't I? You can. All right, so no, don't start it again. All right, so all cnidarians have these stinging cells, right? Remember the coral polyps. They had those stinging cells too. So there's a lot of coral that will get caught. You can look, see how the fish get caught? So they're paralyzing toxins. Now the corals, most species, their toxins are minimal to humans, but they can sting, like fire coral and things like that. They can sting you. So it depends on which species you're holding or touching by accident. But if you're a fish and you come into these tentacles, these venom that is injected will paralyze you so that you can't swim away. And then they bring that tentacle, they can retract it up and it goes into their mouth. And their mouth and stomach are like a gelatinous sac. And that sac is full of digestive enzymes. So these fish are literally paralyzed and they're getting eaten alive, which is kind of creepy. But that's basically what's happening to them, is that poor guy is going to die. But they're going to be eaten alive. So they're fully aware of what's going on. It's just they can't do anything about it, which is kind of awful. Yeah, depends. They can't move, for sure. Yeah, it'd be kind of an awful way to die. I mean, to be honest with you, it's pretty rough. And if you look at this fish inside the gel. Look at him inside the bell there. Isn't that crazy? All right, but they're constantly replacing these nematocysts. They're constantly replacing these nematoblasts. So once these fire, they're fired, right? Then they have to rebuild the cells for the next time. But once the prey is paralyzed, the tentacles just bring it into the bell, and they're just going to sit there until they die from the enzymes eating them, which is kind of gross. It's a horrible way to die, actually. All right, so this is what an injury from a box jellyfish is gonna look like. This one got wrapped its tentacles around them. They can leave massive amounts of scarring if you can survive. Depending on the species, like irukandji and things like that, these have, like that box jelly that you read about, some of these toxins are so deadly that if they don't get medical attention to you in a matter of minutes, you have to have this antivenom and your heart will shut down. You have to have antivenom available. And that's for, and these little guys, they're so tiny. They're so tiny that you can't see them in the water. And so what was happening is people were dying and nobody knew why. They would have these massive heart attacks at the beach, like young, healthy people, and they would die at the beach and nobody understood why. Like, why is this happening? So they closed all the beaches in Australia for a long time until they were able to find that it happened to be this itty bitty teeny weeny jellyfish that if anybody touched it, they would basically die. And so they found out the antivenom. They have these jellyfish nets now. So if you go to swim in certain places in Australia, they have to have these special nets. Otherwise, if you're outside of the net, you could die. And you can die from this tiny jellyfish just touching you. And that's all it's got to do is just touch you. Yeah. So that's like the worst case, right? Most of these are just going to sting the crap out of you, and they're just kind of a nuisance other than anything else. Luckily, we don't live in Australia, and that's not the problem here, right? Ours are just kind of, yeah, they're going to sting the crap out of you, and it's not fun, but you're not going to die from it unless you have something else horribly wrong with you. All right, so digestion just occurs in the sac. And so the sac is inside of here. See how it's protruding down at the bottom there? And they just kind of put whatever they've caught in their tentacles in that sac, and it's just full of enzymes that digest it, and that's about it. There's no eating technical, like no chewing, no teeth, no real anything other than it's just going to die in there. That's about it. Waste particles are just discharged through the mouth. There is no anus. There is no any of that. It's pretty simple, right? Bones, everything is just regurgitated back out. All right, so these jellies, they reproduce. So they do have separate sexes, and that means males and females. Some of them actually reproduce asexually, where they will basically clone themselves. And most of them actually reproduce sexual. So they have both options available to them. Usually on the Medusa, you have ovaries and testes, and they look like a 4-leaf clover in the top. And those are actually their ovaries and their testes. They draw like a figure 8, 2 figure 8s on the top, and those are actually you're staring at their genitals, basically. But that's where they usually are. This is a bunch of eggs, and their reproduction. These are jellyfish eggs. They look unique, don't they? They look funny.
What are these? They look like olive.
Kind of. They almost look like yolk to me. Like, doesn't it look like the yolks in the eggs, like if you're having breakfast or something? They're interesting. You would never figure that's what they look like, but they do. All right, so on this reproduction, most of these reproduce by releasing sperm and eggs into the water. And remember, like we said, the sperm and eggs are just by happen chance meet each other, right? There's no actual act of copulation. They're not out there having sex. It's just sperm goes out, eggs go out. Hopefully somebody catches each other, right? That's how asexual reproduction is possible, because there's nothing that's stopping the egg from the same organism from being fertilized from the sperm from the same organism. So they can reproduce asexually as well, depending on certain species. Most of them have separate male and females. Some of them can spawn. And remember, what is spawning? I went too far with this one. So what is spawning, guys? What do you got?
Isn't it like how fish do it? Like they lay like little eggs on like eggs or something?
Kind of.
Like they lay little eggs.
So spawning is like the corals do, where they reproduce at once in just massive quantities. They put a whole lot of eggs in the water and a whole lot of sperm in the water and just kind of hope for the best. My mouse has stopped working, sorry. There we go. All right, so eggs and sperm are released separately, but at the same time, and they are synchronous. And the reason why they do this synchronization is because they have higher chance of getting someone else's genetics, right? The more genetically diverse you are, the better. And you know this because you don't marry your brother, right? And you tend to know what happens, right? Alabama. All right, but they spawn at the same time. They're regulated by temperature in the moon phases. But this is a massive coral spawning here. I want to show you what this looks like.
This springtime is the trigger for a submarine spectacular.
So this is what the coral look like. The jellyfish look like the
When
same
the perfect
thing.
tide height, day length, and sea temperature all align, this happens.
Those are the eggs. That's the sperm. Damn.
Some 400.
But look how tiny they really are. They're zoomed in.
Across 3,000 reefs.
Look at all the sperm in the water.
Nights. Tucked inside their limestone armor,
So what
millions of coral polyps release their eggs and sperm simultaneously.
Just like you can't mate a dog and a cat, it wouldn't do that. Yeah, you never know. Some weird, crazy, you know.
Wondering what's big about these tiny floating jewels? Well, together, they're responsible
But that's
for growing
spawning.
the world's largest single living structure, the Great Barrier Reef.
You can see it from space. It's so big. That whole barrier reef.
1,500
All of
miles long. It's almost the vertical length of the United States.
From us to
Making it
Maine.
the only living thing visible from space.
That's all reef
Each time
under the
the
water.
reef reproduces, its gigantic scale increases. The resulting coral larvae travel back down to make their home on the reef. This monumental structure once grew by several inches each year.
So how long does it take until a jellyfish attaches?
It depends on the species.
Of course, now there's a twist to this tale. In recent years, it's thought that half the coral in this big beast has died.
See it
It's
bleaching?
believed rising sea temperatures are responsible for driving away the colorful algae that live inside coral. Without nutrients,
See
and
the
its
dead
distinctive
sections?
shape, it's left bleached white. It appears our modern world is taking its toll on this greatest of beasts.
So over half of it is already gone from bleaching. All right, but that's spawning. So I wanted to show you what spawning actually looked like. It's kind of cool.
This springtime full moon is the
Stop.
trigger for
I
a
don't want to say
submarine
it again. Stop
spectacular.
it. Go away. All right, so that's the end of our stuff on jellies. We're going to talk about sea anemones next time. So keep your information on there.